Hey friends, it's Carrie. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to do a weekly wrap-up video. I did read 4 books this week, but 3 of the books were audiobooks just because it was easier to cook for the holidays and listen to an audiobook. I didn't really have a lot of time over Christmas to sit down and actually read a book, so I only read 1 physical book. But the first book that I listened to was When Breath Becomes Air by Kalanithi, and this wasn't exactly a feel-good, cozy holiday read. This is the memoir of a neurosurgeon who was diagnosed with terminal cancer at the age of 36. The beginning of the book deals a lot with kind of the ins and outs of neurosurgery and why the author chose that as a profession, because initially he was actually an English major, and you could tell he definitely had a love of literature because he is a very solid writer, and unfortunately the author was unable to finish this book. His wife actually finishes the book for him, and that was the part of the book that I found the most compelling and insightful. And I felt like she is a natural writer. Not to take anything away from Paul's writing, this was definitely a very moving book. It's a very courageous story of a man who faces a terminal cancer diagnosis with grace and bravery, and he continues to do surgeries after his cancer diagnosis, and he follows a child. He continues to make a lot of great memories with family and friends. And even though he's a man of science, one of the kind of points of the book is that science does not have the answers for a lot of life's major questions. And I think one of the major takeaways of the book is that you only stop living when you stop breathing, and the author had a lot of really great doctors around him who didn't let this diagnosis that would cripple a lot of people, cripple him to the point where he stopped living. You also see in the book some doctors who don't exhibit a lot of compassion, and you definitely see Paul's transition from being the doctor to being the patient. I don't know that you will find any of, life's major answers in it, but I don't know that anyone has those answers, and I think it's kind of up to everyone to find those for his or herself. I do admire this author because Paul took a very devastating situation and he made the most with what time he had left, and I don't know that I would do the same in that situation. So definitely a great read. The second book that I read this week was I, Robot by Asimov, and this is of course a classic science fiction work. It's actually a set of short stories, and it centers around a robo-psychologist named Susan Calvin, and each little vignette kind of deals with a problem that they've encountered with these robots. And Susan's job is to figure out what has gone awry. Now, you might be asking yourself, why would a robot need a psychologist? But I thought this book was extremely clever because the robots have been programmed according to 3 basic laws of robotics. The laws are: number 1, a robot may not injure a human being or through inaction allow a human being to come to harm. 2, a robot must obey orders given it by human beings except when such orders conflict with the first law. And 3, a robot must protect its own existence as long as such protection does not conflict with the first or second laws. So we have these 3 laws. There's kind of a hierarchy there with the laws. And so you do see how if a robot is trying to determine how to adhere to those 3 laws and how to work out different scenarios, it would be difficult for someone to figure out what is going on. And so each of these little stories kind of seem to me like a little detective story. It's almost a little mystery. I did enjoy the format. Susan Calvin is being interviewed, and so she is kind of remembering the scenarios in retrospective. I liked that. I enjoyed a couple of the characters. There was some humor in these stories, and I also enjoyed the relationship between the robots and the humans. In one of the earlier stories, we actually see one of the children become very attached to her robot, and it actually made me think of society today and how a lot of our children are extremely attached to their smartphones. And unfortunately, for some children, that smartphone is their primary connection. That is their best friend. The child in this book is not necessarily playing with other neighborhood children. The children in your neighborhood might not necessarily be playing with other children, but they are looking at that smartphone. So I don't know, it made me think of modern society a little bit. And this book was written in 1950, so it did make me view it through a Cold War lens. I don't know that Isaac Asimov was much on social commentary. I am a Ray Bradbury fan, and I know he did a lot of that in his sci-fi novels, but maybe there's a little bit of that here, or maybe I'm reading too much into it. But I do know that the Cold War was a time of uncertainty, and it was a time of questions about technology. You know, is this technology and living in a nuclear age, is it a good thing? Does it provide greater security that we have this technology? Or is it, very detrimental to society, because now we're living in a time where at any point we could be on the brink of nuclear war? And should we really have humans in charge of, having their finger on the button? Maybe it would be better if we had robots who had to act according to a set of laws like this, where they couldn't, put human beings in harm's way. I don't know. It just made me think about this through a Cold War lens. Maybe I'm overthinking it, but either way, I really enjoyed this book. I might continue the series at some point. And I did pick up this book based on my friend John at Hey Y'all Listen Up's recommendation, so I will link his channel in the description box. So thanks, John. I don't read a ton of this type of books, so I am glad that I picked it up. The next book that I listened to this week was Someone We Know by Shari Lapena, and this is the second Shari Lapena book that I've read. The first book that I've read by her was The Couple Next Door, which I didn't really care for. I thought that book was extremely convoluted and unrealistic. The characters were very flat, and I didn't care for it. But I thought I'd give her another try, and this one was a lot better. Essentially, what we have here is a couple, Olivia and Paul, and their son Riley has been breaking into some neighborhood houses to do some hacking. He's just hacking into computers, not stealing anything, but he is snooping around. And when the parents find out about this, they disagree on how to handle it. The mom feels extremely guilty, and so she decides she's going to write an anonymous apology letter. And so Olivia writes this letter, and she puts it into the victim's door slots or mailboxes, I can't remember which, and she thinks that's the end of it. Well, one of the victims is new in the neighborhood. Her name is Carmen, and she makes it her mission to find out who broke into her house. And so she knocks on all the neighborhood doors, essentially making a nuisance of herself, trying to figure out, did you get broken into, or do you have any teenage sons? She wants to know who broke into her house. Meanwhile, at the neighborhood book club, the big news is that the neighborhood hottie, Amanda Pierce, who's a big flirt, and so she's probably been a big topic at the book club already, She has left her husband. She's gone missing. And so the rumor mill is running in overdrive at this point. And it just so happens that the Pierce home is one of the homes that Riley, Olivia's son, actually broke into. So the plot thickens there. And it gets even worse when Amanda Pierce's car is found with her body in the trunk, and she's been bludgeoned to death. So Olivia knows that her son will be a suspect because his fingerprints are in that home, and she has some secrets to keep. And of course, she has sent out these anonymous letters. So, but we find out she's not the only one in this neighborhood with secrets to keep. So this was a good little domestic thriller, and I will say it was better, but pretty much every chapter there were new secrets that were revealed. There were a ton of secrets in this neighborhood. I don't know what kind of cul-de-sac these folks lived in, but there were lots of affairs and lots of secrets, and it wasn't as convoluted, but I didn't care for the way they treated the victim in this book. Amanda Pierce was not well liked because, again, she was the neighborhood flirt, and they did a little bit of victim blaming there. Nobody really cared that she was killed. But there are some twists and turns, and there may be a little bit of a cliffhanger too. So it was enjoyable. It's a very quick, easy read, and I think because it's such a short book, this author really hasn't found the sweet spot to where I'm invested in these characters. And I think that was one of the problems with the other book as well. I'm willing to give this author another shot because this one was enjoyable. I liked this one. Not one of my top thrillers, but it was good. The last book that I read this week was called White Darkness by David Grann. And this author also wrote another really great book that I read this year called Killers of the Flower Moon, The Osage Murders, and the Birth of the FBI. And this book had me on the edge of my seat. This book was very emotional for me. I don't know why, but this book just, even more so than When Breath Becomes Air, this book really just kind of tore me up. And I don't know where I was in 2015 and 2016, because when I start telling you about this book, you've probably already heard this story and you probably remember this being in the news, but I don't remember it being in the news. So when I was reading this, I was like, wow, this was a huge deal. This was pretty monumental. Why have I not heard of this? And after I read the book, I kind of thought about it, and I was like, yeah, I kind of vaguely remember hearing something about this, but I don't remember it being that, big of a deal in the news cycle. I don't remember it being repeated in the news cycle. This book tells the story of Henry Worsley, who was a British Special Forces officer who was kind of enthralled and obsessed with the British explorer Ernest Shackleton. And this obsession leads him to go on his own Antarctic explorations, just like Ernest Shackleton. And although Shackleton had failed to become the first person to reach the South Pole, he repeatedly rescued his crew, and he showed exemplary leadership and fortitude and perseverance. And he later attempted to cross the continent of Antarctica on foot as well. Worsley was actually a descendant of one of Shackleton's crew members, and he collected a lot of Shackleton memorabilia, and he ends up befriending a couple of other descendants. And so in 2008, they actually planned their own expedition to Antarctica, which was successful. They succeed, and in 2011, he replicates another trek across Antarctica. And in 2015, he plans, at the age of 55, after his retirement from the military, he plans a solo trek across the entirety of the continent without the aid of air drop-offs. So this would require him to drag a sled that has 300 pounds of provisions and equipment. And from the outset of this expedition, he experiences problems. There are several storms, whiteout conditions. For 2 days, he's stuck in his tent, and I was just in turmoil, on the edge of my seat, just what is going to happen to this man. And you know, the mental and physical strength that is required to complete this sort of challenge is just unimaginable to me. And I think that, you know, on the two other expeditions, when Henry Worsley was with a group of people, he did feel a sense of leadership and he felt a sense of responsibility for his other crew members. And I think that was similar to Shackleton. You know, when Shackleton was in Antarctica, he felt a sense of responsibility to make sure that his crew was safe. And there's a great quote from Ernest Shackleton, which Worsley and his wife sometimes repeated, and I loved. Ernest Shackleton said, "Better a live donkey than a dead lion." That was his quote when he failed to make it to the South Pole. And I totally agree with that, because just to be in Antarctica is a feat in and of itself. I mean, I think some people are just hardwired in their brain to crave mental and physical challenges and adrenaline, and they feel unfulfilled and unhappy if they don't have that sort of stimulation. And I'm the opposite. I am hardwired for comfort and cozy, and I enjoy some mental challenges, some mental stimulation. But I do, you know, I've run half marathon distance and that sort of thing, but you know, I'm not signing up for anything that's going to risk life and limb. And I'm just not wired that way. And I can appreciate and respect these men. After reading this story, I was kind of speechless. I will link an article from CBS News that shows a clip where you can see some of Henry Worsley's video diary and some pictures from his Antarctic expedition, because he did keep a video diary. He did have a satellite phone, so he could call for an airlift out of Antarctica. So even though in this 2015 solo trek he goes without any sort of aid or assistance, he does have the ability to get out of there if the emergency need arises. And I don't want to tell you what happens if you're unaware of this. You know, if you were like me, living under a rock, I guess, in 2015, 2016 when this happened. I don't want to ruin it, because I think you should just read about it or watch the story. But this book is only about 160 pages, so very quick read. If you listen to it as an audiobook, it only takes a couple of hours, and I would definitely recommend this one. So I think I might read something that's a little bit less emotionally draining, because this week it was a lot. I did start reading Prelude to Leadership, John F. Kennedy's post-World War II diary. So I just started that, and I'm not sure what I'm going to read next, so we'll see. But I hope you guys are having a great reading week, and I hope you got some great books over Christmas, and I will see you in my next video. Thanks for watching.